Great to have all three of us now.
Indeed.
We've
Welcome.
we've multiplied, which is lovely. And yeah, this term is Matthew 8 to 12. So we've begun on Sunday, and we're launching in. And the series is called Jesus' Costly Way
Indeed. Through
through.
a new wilderness into the new creation.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's thought to be nice and complex for us.
Do you want to share your journey and experience? Like we sat down for planning week and hit this section of scripture. And we all kind of went through that experience of being immersed in how much Matthew is sending us back into the Old Testament, and especially back into the story of the wilderness, the story of Moses, the story of the Exodus.
Yeah.
That was a big theme for Sunday to set up. What was your journey and experience kind of entering the text and coming alive to that?
So we started with where are we up to in Matthew? What's next? We jumped into Matthew 8 to 12, and the first thing that jumped out at us is, hang on, this feels really familiar. There's lots of Old Testament imagery that seems to pop up here and there and everywhere. Starts off with coming down the mountain. So, like, hang on, where else has there been mountain? Context of Sermon on the Mount. So we're like, hang on, law, mountains, coming down. There's a whole bunch of things going on. And so originally we are like, right, we're just going to do a straight exegetical exploration of Matthew 8 to 12. But it became really apparent really quickly that there's a whole bunch of biblical theology and Old Testament imagery that is present in Matthew's exploration of this next section. And we really wouldn't be doing it justice unless we dug a little bit deeper into that kind of Old Testament context. And so, yeah, we've done things like we had a Isaiah reading, had two readings yesterday, which was great. It kind of set the context for where Matthew was going, and he lands in Matthew is himself. He lands in Isaiah 53, and so he's like, all right, if that's where Matthew's landing, we actually can't do Matthew 8, 1 to 17 justice unless we at least explore Isaiah 53. But the more we kept digging, the more Old Testament gold kept falling out. And I feel like that's going to be the pattern for the whole term, because there's just so much rich, beautiful language and Old Testament imagery that comes through God's redemptive story through Jesus. And yeah, like obviously last year we came out of the series where really we were looking at Jesus as the new Israel, kind of walking Israel's story, but doing it well this time. And so we're already operating a little bit in that space this time last year. And so as we approach, it's good to kind of keep that in our background, in the back of our minds, and think about what really Jesus is doing, firstly as new Israel, but then obviously as we were working through, and I mean, you remember from planning week, we started playing with the Exodus and the exile and the new creation as lenses. And there's just a whole bunch of cool stuff that pops up when you're thinking about that mirroring of God's story in different contexts at different times.
Isn't it funny how, like last year, yeah, especially Matthew chapter 2 begins to set up those categories, especially because there is an explicit reference from Hosea, out of Egypt I called my son. So that's the first, like, definite, okay, Matthew himself is trying to say Jesus in some way is fulfilling Israel's story. But the interesting way that, as we're sort of seeing, yeah, you said on Sunday, yep, he's out of Egypt. He crosses the river Jordan. He goes into the wilderness to be tempted. He goes up the mountain with God's law, da da da. All of that stuff is the way like Matthew is kind of pulling from the Exodus. But maybe the other interesting stepping stone that I think we're all like coming into is the way that the prophets themselves like refract the Exodus through into that picture of how salvation's going to come. So the fact Matthew quotes Hosea or quotes Isaiah 53, suddenly it sort of becomes, we're not just dipping back to the Exodus story to go, how's that feeding into Matthew's story? but we're actually trying to discover how Matthew has been reading the prophets and how the prophets themselves are actually reflecting on the Exodus and coming to understand this place that they're in, entering exile or returning from exile and going, but yeah, God's salvation has not, we have not met God's salvation yet. We're still waiting for the Messiah. And in a way, Matthew's gospel is both pulling in Exodus, but also pulling in exile to sort of set up, God's people in the land with a temple sitting there doing its thing, but still far from God.
Yeah. I reckon Matthew is a gospel, so obviously it's Jesus-centric because Jesus is God's son. We know that. But Matthew, I think, is particularly keen to unfold that messianic redemption thread and weaving Jesus' fulfillment of a whole bunch of Old Testament prophecies, well, the prophets clearly. And yeah, he does embed Jesus. Well, sorry, he doesn't. God embeds Jesus in Israel's history. But Matthew is going, hey, look at all these resonances. Look at all these fulfillments. Look at the prophets. Look at the law. Look at the history. Look at everything. Jesus is God's guy. And here is how he unfolds in his redemptive story all the way through, which I like. I love because I think at some level, each of the gospel writers has a slightly different flavour. It feels like they've got different target audiences and different ways of operating to try and get to a particular outcome. And Matthew feels really rich in Old Testament imagery. And so almost as Matthew's writing the gospel, he's like, I've got a bunch of Jewish mates that I'd like to share the good news of Jesus with. What's going to resonate with them? Well, let's tell Israel's story. Let's show how Jesus fulfills Israel's story. Not only does he repeat all the patterns, he succeeds where we fail. Israel's story, what does that end? That ends in exile, or at least that one of the first stops is exile because of disobedience. And Jesus as new Israel, rather than disobedience, we see an obedience lens. And you go, right, where's obedience going to take him? And look, death. Substitutionary death, but there's actually a positive arc. It's almost what could have been in Israel had they been obedient, with a bit of crucifixion in there as well.
Is it fair to say, probably in our own experience and learning, that some of the joy of coming to Matthew and sort of discovering some of these allusions comes when you follow the rabbit trail? So if Matthew quotes a verse, it's often the case that if you go back to, say, an Isaiah 53 and read the whole chapter, or if you kind of understand how Isaiah 53 sits in this movement at the back end of Isaiah of these beautiful kind of new creation prophecies and messianic prophecies and images of this suffering servant, that it's not just the verse necessarily that Matthew's pulling in, but assuming that if you're familiar with that verse and that chapter and that context, that when that verse drops on you, straight away what comes into your head is, new creation, suffering servant, reversing the curse. All of that stuff comes in your brain as well. And so you were reading Isaiah last week and we were doing the same, and it means when you read Matthew, those images are just kind of popping in your brain.
Absolutely. So ordinarily we do context by going, right, what's the verse say? What's the quote? That makes sense of what's going on. But I think Matthew actually presupposes the big idea of the chapter rather than just a little proof text. And so it's going to take longer, but suck it up. Jump back into where it is quoted and try and understand what's going on in that section. And sure, like in Isaiah, maybe you need to figure out what the whole book's saying. But Matthew is presupposing an understanding, a deeply theologically rich understanding of what's going on in Isaiah, and particularly the suffering servant narrative in this passage. But yeah, there's so much presupposed knowledge that Matthew is expecting his reader to have already in their minds. And so, I think we desperately need to work hard at understanding context. because you go, like, lots of the time you read through on first plain reading, you're like, that's weird. What's going on with that? Why does the centurion not enter the house? Why does he say, I don't want you to enter my house?
Mm-hmm.
What's the go with that? Is there Jewish purity laws going on? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's dive back and find out what is happening in the Old Testament at that particular moment. And go show yourself to the priest.
Yeah.
Like, what's the function of that? We've actually got to go jump into Exodus 13 and 14 to understand what the laws are regarding cleanliness, what the function of the priest is, and how that actually has an impact on things like reconciliation, restitution, understanding how community is embraced and being able to participate in only once cleanliness is restored and not before. So I've seen that context piece is massive in Matthew.
Do we want to dive in? So we've got a leper, we've got a centurion, a Roman fellow, and we've got Peter's mother-in-law. Do we want to kind of go through? So we've got this cleansing right up at the start. That's putting before our brain this category of, being unclean or ritually impure. Not categories that, are so familiar for us, except for hand washing and sanitization stations and everything that COVID maybe taught us. Maybe that's the closest we've gotten to that experience of, whoa, don't touch me, man.
Yeah.
But do you want to take us through like that experience of Jesus and a leper and what that's pulling in with Leviticus?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things going on. Well, one thing I want to flag is what unifies the three cleansing episodes. Something that we didn't really go into in the talk because it was already long enough, I think. But one of the interesting things is the interplay with houses in this particular chapter. The leper is excluded from God's house, so he's ceremonially unclean, and we'll get to Leviticus in a moment. So he's unable to enter God's house. You've got the centurion who doesn't want God to enter his house, and then you've got Peter as mother-in-law in Peter's house. So you've got three houses. You've got ceremonial uncleanliness. You've got Gentiles feeling excluded from the house, and then you've got the house of the Jews where God comes into as well. So there's a beautiful picture of Jesus working outside the house or outside the camp, as we were kind of talking about, which will tie into the Exodus language. You've got Jesus not entering the Gentiles' house, but his healing power has entered the Gentiles' house. And it's not at the exclusion of Israel, because he does still go into the house of Israel. And so there's this beautiful picture there going on. The temple's talked about as God's house, and there's obviously interplay with the leper, has to go to the temple and show himself. I just think there's something really interesting to play with there, to think about what is the role of the house in this particular section. And I think Leviticus 13 and 14 helps us to understand what's piecing together there. Firstly, in Leviticus, particularly 13 and 14, it's talking about ceremonial cleanliness and ceremonial uncleanliness, specifically with reference to defiling skin diseases. And like leprosy, as the Kids Talk helpfully put it yesterday, it is contagious. There's no real
healing mechanism.
Healing. There's no it's not just I'll go and rub a bit of cream into it and go sit in the sun for a bit and it'll dry out. There's no classic helpful healing mechanism. And the consequence of that is ceremonial uncleanliness. You need to live outside the camp, and you can't participate in community in general with your friends and family. You need to live alone outside the camp, which is that kind of horizontal element of fellowship. But it also prevents you from having access to God, because you can't go into the temple because you're ceremonially unclean. And unlike other ceremonially uncleanlinesses, whatever, I don't know, English, me fail English, that's impossible. But the mechanism of cleansing is ordinarily like things like wait a week, knock off a dove, go and stand in the sun for a bit, and then you'll be ceremonially clean, you can come in. With the defiling skin diseases, that's not something that's going to take place. And so this is permanent exclusion from God's family, your family, the camp of Israel and being completely excluded. But it goes on in chapter 14 to provide the mechanisms for re-entry and re-inclusion if the person is cleansed. So that ifs are massive, and it's almost like I almost feel as though as Moses writing the law and gets to this point, goes, if they're healed of their defiling skin disease, everyone's like, what a waste of paper. Do you not know how much papyri and parchment costs these days, Moses? Don't worry about that. It's never going to happen. Lepers don't get healed. It's almost as though this is foreshadowing the work of the Messiah thousands of years in advance, and says, if they do it, here's the process. Go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices. So blood sacrifice, you've got doves on day one, you've got other animals on a week later, and then you are reconciled to both horizontally to community and vertically to God, which that's a beautiful picture. But it's re-entry into the camp and reconciliation at that particular point.
The thing I found interesting, and you said this a bunch of times, is I guess for Jesus to come off the mountain, and this is the first healing, and this section has got a whole heap of these kind of healings. Jesus and the miracles are really important in this part, but to have this one as the first one, which is keeping us in this wilderness story. We're in Leviticus now. We're deep in the weeds. Leviticus 13 and 14. Yep. Go and read it. But just interesting the way that even in the wilderness story, I think Leviticus 25 and 26 are maybe two other chapters that they might not get referenced in the series, but nice to have in the background, because Moses anticipates, and God does, that God's people who are trying to live God's way are going to fail. And it anticipates that they're going to be scattered out of the land. And Leviticus 26 is sort of the chapter of curses. Like, here are the curses that will come upon you if you don't obey. And one of the curses that's mentioned in Leviticus 26 is skin diseases. Yeah. So Leviticus 26 sort of paints this impurity and this uncleanliness and this disease as a picture of the curse among us. Not that if you're a leper, you're meant to go, oh, I must have sin, whatever. But it is a picture of what only God can, the restoration only God can bring. And so I think I was just thinking this morning as well that, like, another good example of that is in Numbers 11 and 12, Moses and then Miriam and Aaron rebel against Moses, and one of the curses that comes on Miriam is leprosy. And so Moses has to intercede. There's a little messianic moment. He prays to God and heal her disease, and she's healed. So that story embeds in that context of this wilderness narrative. You are meant to kind of see this as part of the curse. And prophets, and I guess we'll get to Isaiah 53, but like Isaiah 53, amongst other prophets, talk about the messianic coming as one that will reverse the curse. And so there will be healings, and the nations, the lame will leap like a deer, and the blind eyes will be opened. All of these images of people with sickle, they're broken, they're diseased, the Messiah is going to reverse all of that. And that'll be the foreshadowing of the new creation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as you think about him coming down the mountain, the Exodus picture of coming down the mountain is Moses coming down, and the first thing he does is confront idolatry. So it's golden calf in Exodus, which is blatant idolatry. What does idolatry do? Idolatry sets you outside the camp. It makes you spiritually unclean. And so it's interesting in Matthew, similarly, he's tackling an idolatry, but in a very different way. This spiritual condition of ceremonial uncleanliness, which is not because of something like, the guy's not inherently sinful. He's not a leper because he's a sinner, but this outward appearance is revealing the nature of his spiritual uncleanliness. Jesus is tackling spiritual uncleanliness in the same way that Moses was tackling spiritual uncleanliness. And he was bringing outsiders back into the camp off the basis of his redemptive work, in the same way that Moses, again, messianically, was bringing Israel back into obedience and confronting that. And then, like, there's a whole bunch of, like, my mind goes to the curse of disobedience of the poisonous snakes, and you've got to look to the exalted symbol of God's redemption as the mechanism of healing at that particular point, which that screams Jesus. That's a massive
John
image
3.
there.
Yeah.
But that it's just really interesting how Matthew's integrating this Exodus story and the treatment of idolatry and the cleansing of spiritual uncleanliness and the redemption arc that is actually integrating both the Exodus and Jesus' story, saying, hey, look, it's the same but different. It's the same story, and it's heading in a similar redemptive path, but this time completely positive once for all, rather than just a temporary blip on the radar.
And so maybe a big hint, yes, God's people, Israel, are living in Jerusalem and living in the land, and yes, they've got a temple, and yes, they even have King Herod as their king over them.
Yeah.
But Israel is a place of spiritual uncleanliness, and Messiah has come, kind of thing. Do we want to dive into?
Well, I was just going to ask. So, I'm curious. You've got the Exodus where people are driven out into the wilderness, but here they're in Jerusalem. They're in Israel. It doesn't seem like they're anywhere. And you mentioned in the sermon yesterday that there is a little element of a real spiritual exile and a separation from God, that they are in a wilderness. Can you touch a little bit more on that and what that actually looks like in this?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing for me is, where does this healing take place? I would expect the place that God interacts with his people in a cleansing of sin to be the temple, right? So, what's the function of the sacrificial system? It's to atone, it's to pay the penalty for sin, it's to restore and reconcile relationship to God. This leper interaction happens outside the camp. And again, I don't want to do the integration too much, but in Leviticus 14, the priest is responsible to go outside the camp and examine them outside the camp. And so Jesus is not only examining him outside the camp, he's also healing him outside the camp. And then the verification takes place back in the house of God, in the temple at that particular point in time. But the temple interactions, and it'll continue to unfold. It'll accelerate until the temple essentially tries to kill Jesus. But the place that we expect God to be working, which is the temple, is not the location of this story. The place of this healing is taking place in God's new temple, Jesus, who is the one who will endure forever. And so it's puzzling that this takes place. And my head scratching moment was, why does he say, go and go and show yourself to the priest, go and offer the sacrifice that Moses commanded in Leviticus 13 and 14? Why? Jesus is the boss. Why is he actually trying to integrate himself into this system? And I think the beautiful thing about Matthew's gospel is it highlights Jesus' heart for lost Israel first, and it's only after lost Israel has been sought that Gentiles start to be included. And I was he doesn't completely ignore Gentiles. I mean, the centurion is a Gentile and he's redeemed.
But there's not many of those stories in this section just now. We're hold the fort on that. Yes, the centurion, but yes,
and
that's coming.
Matthew clearly cares about Gentiles. So the end, the pinnacle, Matthew 28, on every church website everywhere, it's go and make disciples of all nations. That's actually Matthew's building to the Gentile explosion. But at this particular moment, Jesus is going first to the lost sheep of Israel and then to the ends of the earth. But the thing for me there is this is not taking place in the temple, and we don't see that. Does he go to the temple? Don't know. Matthew doesn't tell us. What's the response of the temple? Do they go get out of here? Or yes, absolutely, you're now reconciled, come to the tent of meeting, or whatever the Jerusalem equivalent of tent of meeting is, because obviously temple's not tabernacle, and it's a whole different kettle of fish. But the movement is away from temple as the center of God's interaction with his people into new temple, Jesus, which is the primary mechanism of engagement with God on earth, is going to be Jesus going forward, and that continues to accelerate, ultimately culminating, and I can't remember whether Matthew majors on the curtain tearing.
The curtain does tear in Matthew, I think.
Matthew, yeah, okay, cool. But like as in at the tearing of the curtain, the temple becomes no longer a symbol of meeting with God, because Jesus has finished the job. He's fulfilled the temple's role in salvation.
The barrier is torn away.
The
Holy of Holies is now extended wherever God's Spirit goes and God's people are.
Direct access to God through his... we no longer need a mediator, because we've got the mediator who's sacrificed once for all. Yeah. He's done the Leviticus 13 and 14 thing, but it's not just a couple of pigeons and another animal. Jesus' sacrifice once for all completely cleanses. Yeah, which is beautiful. Centurion. It's a bit of an interesting part of the story. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I like that this is beginning to surface the place of faith. Yep. So we're sort of giving an image already of who Jesus is and the kind of salvation he's come to bring. And I guess, as you hinted in the sermon as well, not merely salvation for sin, but healing of the nations and healing of the people is actually integrated with God's salvific work, because that's the new creation will be the place where there's no more sickness or crying or pain. So that's important. Yeah. But the centurion story is now surfacing this faith and what faith actually looks like. Yeah, you spoke passionately about that, and that was quite encouraging to hear.
Yeah, I kind of I really like where Jesus he almost plays with the centurion. So there's a couple of times he does that. The first is when he's confronted with the information that the centurion's servant is sick. He says, "Would you like me to come and heal him?" So like he sets it up perfectly. He lays it on the table and says, "Would you like me to heal him?" And the answer is yes, I'd like you to heal him, but no, I don't think I'm worthy of you entering my household. And so therefore just do the remote healing thing, like just do like Bluetooth healing. It's like, or long range Wi-Fi. Like it's remarkable. And then at the end, he tells a whole big story about how this is a beautiful picture of faith, the division of families and breaking down of families, which we'll get to in a sec. But then he goes, "Let it be so, just as you have believed." And so Jesus is connecting this healing to his faith. Not causative. Jesus is the agent of this healing, but he's permitting him to actually get his way because of this radical, shamelessly audacious faith, which I just think is a beautiful, beautiful picture. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, the sons thing. So NIV 11 says...
do you know what verse that was? That was interesting.
The servants will be cast out.
Yes, so we got
verse 12, I think.
Yeah, what's it say? The
subjects of the kingdom.
So the word sitting behind that is sons. And so this whole family division thing going on, and so it's just interesting playing at. If you read that as the sons being removed and the Gentiles being grafted in at the banquet of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like this is the banquet, the heavenly picture. It's the dwelling in the house of the Lord forever kind of imagery, and Jesus is really clearly saying, sons are out, Gentiles are in. Not all of them. But he's really locating the mechanism of inclusion in the family of God is purely based on faith. It's not genealogical connection to a particular nation. It's not strict adherence to the law or the prophets, or it's not being in the right stream of being a Pharisee or a Sadducee. It's on the basis of faith. And the implications for this is the centurion is being rewarded and being granted a seat at the table, and the centurion is being grafted into the family of God on the basis of his faith in Jesus to be able to perform this particular healing miracle. And I think it's wider than it's not just faith that he's able to execute this particular function of healing, but it's actually a symbol of Jesus' authority and power. I actually think we've got a picture here of the Gentile, the outsider, who is essentially recognizing God's Messiah. He's recognizing he's the one with power and authority, and he's going, I trust him. I'm going to back him. He's the guy that's going to do it. He doesn't even need to be in close proximity. He can remotely heal my servant. And I do like how he's not just, it's not just about healing, although like he obviously wants his servant healed. There's this beautiful subordination of self to Jesus that is just a picture of how I think how our posture should be towards Jesus.
And going off of that, at the same time, within the historical narrative, this is a Roman centurion in which, this is a culture in which Rome is above all, right? Their goal here is to maintain order and to show that Rome is powerful and Rome is in control. It's the iron grip. And so here's this like pretty high up Roman soldier actually falling at the feet of a Jewish nomad. That's a huge, huge thing in terms of like, that would have been confusing as a Jew at the time watching that happen. I wouldn't have known what to think. So the idea of like humbling himself before Jesus, I think, is really significant historically. I don't know if maybe that's a tangent, but
no, absolutely. Like, what would it cost him to be subordinating himself to Jesus? Like, if another Roman soldier goes, hang on, that's not how we treat the Jewish population. What are you doing? I mean, does he lose his job? Does he lose his life? What are the implications for him? But it's a beautiful picture. Like the power dynamic. Like if a little kid and a police officer are having a conversation, you would expect the police officer would be authoritative, and you go, all right, police officer and a kid, he's probably lost. We've got to go find the parents or whatever. In that power dynamic, to have the kid actually driving the interaction and telling the police officer what they have to do, we kind of go, that doesn't fit to our picture of what we expect to see in these kind of interactions. But that is the picture, because this guy has faith in Jesus more than he has fear of the Roman Empire, maybe. He's certainly not driven by fear of losing job, losing face. Like, even calling him Lord is that's audacious, right? So sorry, anytime I interact with a police officer, I always call them sir, right? It's not, I'm not afraid of them. It's a sign of respect, because I see and I observe the rank or whatever you want to call it that. But this centurion, even though he probably has positional authority and hierarchical superiority to Jesus, he does say Lord, Sir, Master, Savior. Like there's that deliberate self-subordination and exalting of Jesus, which is a picture of faith. That's the beautiful thing going on at that point.
And very quickly in the story, we're led to ask, where are we going to see such faith in Israel as Jesus begins to interact with both people of the crowds, but also as the religious leaders step in? Where do we see anyone falling at the feet of Jesus? And the implication of that is he let go of status and position and authority to subordinate to Christ. That's the call on all of us, that we're meant to be and we're made to be at the feet of Jesus, saying, Lord.
Yeah. And if you think about the two households, you've got the house of God who's not showing faith in Jesus. Sure, they're verifying the healing in that first one. You've got the centurion's household who's expressing faith. Where in Israel? Well, it's not in the temple. It's now in the Gentiles' house where faith's being expressed. Before we then pivot to another Jewish household to see, well, what's faith being expressed in that third section? Sorry, you were going to say something.
I thought I saw Jared. Maybe were you?
I was just going to say, could you potentially say that the rock not cut by human hands has crushed the foot of the statue?
Maybe. There you go. Daniel integration. That's absolutely. And like as we pivot into that last section where Jesus enters Peter's house, it's a really strange little excerpt because Peter's mother's sick. Peter's mother-in-law is sick. We don't see it the first bit. Peter goes, "Oh, Jesus, whilst you're here, could you heal Mum? Like she's crook." Jesus goes in and heals her straight off the bat. And so that's strange. And so even when you look at like the centurion,
it's just
household,
a cold, Jesus. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, so it's all right. Just like Sudafed, 8 hours sleep.
She's got the sniffles.
Right. Yeah. Toughen up, princess. Come on. Yeah. But you've got the centurion's household expressing faith, and then you've got Jesus entering a Jewish household. There's no request for healing. There's no explicit faithing by anyone. But yet Jesus' radical generosity plays out. Again, he touches, so in the same, like the leper he touches Peter's mother-in-law. And so it's really interesting. If you ask the question, in the first 17 verses of Matthew 8, where is the faith? At the moment, the faith in Israel is in the Gentile households. It's not currently being expressed in the house of Israel. And he heals her. And I just love how she gets up and immediately starts waiting on them. It's just this beautiful picture of restoration and purpose. She's not healed just so everyone goes, yay, this is great. She actually is restored to then fulfill function, to have purpose, to participate in community, to embrace her role within the household. It's a full restoration to ordinary life in community. It's not this, let's go shout it from the rooftops. It's like, oh, we've actually restored our ability to function in healthy community. And we can now live in this household, blessed by Jesus, but actually living out just an ordinary, faithful existence because of the radical generosity of Jesus. And it's just really interesting, contrasting the two shamelessly audacious expressions of faith with Jesus, what do you call it? Unsolicited healing. He just goes and heals. There's no thing on whether the mother-in-law's like, come on, I was on workers' comp. I actually wanted to stay there. The healing happens. It's immediate. She's restored. And then, it continues on to then get into this beautiful place of many others were healed, which again is that fulfillment of the Isaiah 53 suffering servant. That seemed to light you up. Did you have any reflections on the Isaiah 53?
Isaiah 53?
Connection? Yep.
Only that, like, maybe it's almost an invitation for all of us to go back and read Isaiah 40 to 66. Just because Isaiah imagines the new creation as the reversal of all of this. So, like, Matthew chooses this moment after these three healings to stick that quote in. To give us this picture that, wow, here's the Messiah who's come. He's going to take away our sins, but he's also going to heal the creation. And it'll be interesting that in 2 weeks' time, when we come to the paralyzed man, Jesus sort of, without Matthew giving us Isaiah, but Jesus sort of puts that question up front. There's a paralyzed man. He's lame. What's easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or get up, take your mat and walk. But I want you to know that the Son of God has authority to forgive sins. So Isaiah 53 gives us this framing of Messiah forgiving sins, but also he's bringing the new creation.
Absolutely. And so the suffering servant episode, the inauguration of the suffering servant is healings. And so that's why Matthew's going, you know what? These healings are a symbol that the suffering servant has arrived. This is his inauguration. And so we're going to see him continue to march down this path of the suffering servant, which makes us expect suffering, death, reconciliation, and the payment of sins. I know we've read the gospel hundreds of times, but at this particular moment, you're like, how exactly is the suffering servant going to execute the once for all payment for sin? And we know the answer is through death and resurrection. But like I always love coming back fresh to this moment, going, what's the unfolding narrative telling us? All right, so this suffering servant is going to do a whole bunch of healings. There's going to be displays of power, and ultimately there's going to be some once for all tremendous sacrifice that's substitutionary, that enables all people, both faithful Gentiles and faithful Israel, to be engrafted back into permanent communion with God through the shedding of blood, which is that Exodus 14 imagery, the shedding of blood, and the gathering at the tent of meeting, which symbolised reconciliation both with community and with God. So I just think that's a beautiful picture. So yeah, look, I'm excited to be back in Matthew.
Yeah.
I think it's a really fun space to be in, and I think it'd be a really good idea for us to spend a bit of time in Isaiah, chasing those footnotes. So as we're reading the word, when there's a quote, and like, I mean, I've got a reference Bible, so there's like every verse has got some link to the Old Testament. Go and read not just the verse, but the whole particular chapter.
I spoke to someone this week that said, I'm doing every quote where the Gospels say Jesus fulfilled it. I'm going back to look through.
Yeah, that's a great instinct. I think that's what we need to lean into. To actually get a full picture of what Matthew's trying to communicate to us, it's a beautiful thing. And I mean, like, we'll continue to try our hardest to bring as much of that to people's attention, but I think there's no substitute for actually just sitting in God's word, understanding it in context, and understanding the passages that it's alluding to in context as well. So I'm excited. This will be a good term, hopefully. So,
Beautiful.